All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're taking a look at OAuth in Slack apps.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, if you're working with Slack as a software engineer, this is going to be pretty fundamental stuff for you.
It is. If you've ever clicked that add to Slack button and wondered what magic is happening behind the scenes,
Yeah,
this is it. This is the deep dive on that.
yeah,
OAuth is how your app gets permission to access a user's Slack data without them having to give you their password.
right, right.
And today we're going to be looking at Slack's own documentation on OAuth, which is actually surprisingly detailed and full of real usable information.
Yeah, it goes like way deeper than I was expecting. I thought it was going to be kind of surface level, like here's the API, figure it out.
Right.
But no, they actually give you real code examples and explain how things work.
Yeah, it does. It's a great resource. Right out of the gate, it breaks down the OAuth flow into three main steps.
Yeah.
So you start by requesting these specific permissions, they're called scopes. Then you've got to get the user's approval. And then assuming they say yes, you use that to get what's called an access token. And that access token, that's your golden ticket to actually do anything with the Slack API.
Right, that's how you actually log in, essentially.
Exactly.
This is the app.
Exactly. So let's dig into those scopes a little bit.
Mm.
The documentation actually uses this analogy of a house guest.
Oh.
If you invite someone to your house, you wouldn't give them access to every single room, right?
Right. My app just needs to post messages. I don't need access to private channels and all that stuff.
Exactly. So you only request the scopes or the rooms that your app actually needs to function. And that's a core principle of OAuth. It's not just about security, it's about building user trust. You don't want to scare away potential users by asking for way more than you need.
Right. I'm not going to install an app that wants to read all my private messages if it's just supposed to, set reminders or something. It's wild how that little add to Slack button kicks off this whole permission dance in the background.
It is, and the documentation does a great job of explaining why it's designed this way. They even compare it to a bank vault. You need two keys to open it, right?
Okay.
So it's two-factor authentication. You've got the user's approval, and then you've got your app's secret credentials. That way, only the right people get access.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Now, to actually get that user approval, things get a little more technical.
Yep.
You have to redirect users to a specific Slack URL, and it's got all these parameters.
I'm looking at that right now, and yeah, it's there's a lot going on in that URL. Cliented, scope, redirection rate, what do all those even mean?
Okay. So each of those plays a specific role in the authorization process.
Okay.
Think of cliented as your app's ID card. It tells Slack, hey, this app is requesting access.
Gotcha.
And scope, that's where you list all those permissions we were talking about, the rooms your app needs access to. And then there's redirection, and this one's really important.
Yeah, I actually saw the documentation calls out a specific error for this one, bad redirection.
Right.
So I'm guessing that's where Slack sends the user back after they've said yes or no to those permissions?
Yes, exactly. After the user makes their choice, Slack sends them back to your app, but only if the redirectory in the URL matches exactly with what you've configured in your app settings.
So you gotta be really careful setting that up.
Yeah, if it doesn't match perfectly, boom, you get that bad redirectory error.
It's imagine writing the wrong address on an envelope.
Oh,
It's that package is never gonna arrive.
it is, it is. And to make things even more secure, this redirect URL has to use HTTPS. No sending sensitive data over insecure connections.
Right. So let's say everything goes right. The user approves the permissions, Slack sends them back to the right place. Then what?
Then comes the final step in the OAuth dance. Exchanging that authorization, kind of like a temporary code you get, for a real access token. And the documentation actually gives a curl command to show you how it's done. It's not just theoretical. They give you the real deal code snippet.
Nice. And this is where that other secret comes in, the client secret.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Remember that bank vault analogy? This is the second key. It proves that you are who you say you are, that you're the legitimate owner of the app. You send this client secret along with that temporary code.
Gotcha. And then Slack knows it's really you, and it's okay, here's the access token. Go wild.
And once you have that access token, you can finally start interacting with the Stack API, posting messages, reading channels, all that good stuff.
Sweet. It's we finally have the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly.
But before we go crazy with power,
Right.
we got to talk about security. I
Yeah.
mean, this access token is basically like a password, right?
It is, and the documentation is very clear about treating it that way. They even suggest looking into encryption or using some kind of dedicated secure storage to keep it safe.
Yeah, you don't want to be leaving that lying around.
Absolutely not. And it's not just about getting access, it's about managing that access responsibly.
Right. So, like, what happens if a user uninstalls my app? Or what if, like, their Slack account gets deactivated or something?
That's where token revocation comes in, and the documentation has a whole section on that too. There's this method, auth.revoke, that lets you essentially take back access.
Oh, okay. So it's like a kill switch.
It is, and they go into detail about how to use it, when to use it, and what the consequences are. Like, if you revoke a token, it disables any bot users associated with it, any slash commands, any incoming webhooks. It's like a clean break.
Wow. This is a lot more involved than I was expecting.
Right?
I thought Oath was just like, get permission, get a token, done. But there's a lot of, like, ongoing management involved.
There is. But that's the key to building a secure and robust integration.
For sure. So we've gone from, like, clicking that add to Slack button to, like, understanding the whole behind-the-scenes security dance.
We have, and we've even touched on how to actually use those access tokens.
Right. But that's a whole other deep dive.
That's right. In the next part, we're going to go beyond the basics and actually look at some code examples and see how to put these access tokens to work.
Awesome.
It's going to be fun.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right, so stay tuned for part 2, where we'll really get our hands dirty with the Slack API.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've Gantt stance, we've got our access token. Now what? Like, how do we actually use this thing to do stuff with the Slack API?
That's where this documentation really shines. It doesn't just stop at the here's your token part. It goes deep on how to actually make API calls. Gives you real examples.
Yeah, because looking at the list of things you can do, it's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
You can post messages, you can read channel history, you can manage users.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's like, where do you even start?
Well, they do a good job of breaking it down step by step. Like, first things first, they really emphasize how to include your access tokens securely in those API requests.
Okay.
Primarily, you're going to be using what's called the authorization header
Right.
with the bearer token approach.
Gotcha. So, like, if I want to post a message to a channel, I'm picturing I'd, like, make a POST request to some endpoint and include my token in the header.
Exactly. And they've got a code snippet that shows exactly how to do that. Like, they don't just talk about it, they show you the code.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
And what's cool is they even show different ways to include the token depending on the type of request.
Oh, okay.
So for like application JSON requests, bearer token in the header.
Okay.
But if you're doing application SKIX www down form Erlang coded, you can actually include the token as a parameter in the body of the request itself.
So there's, like, different options depending on what you're trying to do.
Yep. Flexibility. Now, if you're looking at that chat.post message, that's the API method to actually post a message.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward. You build up this JSON payload with the channel ID, the message text, any other fancy stuff you want to add.
Right.
And you just send it off to the API endpoint with your token.
And they've got, like, a whole list of the different parameters you can use with chat.post message.
They do.
Like, to format the message, to add attachments, all that stuff.
Yeah, you can get really creative with it.
This is making a lot more sense now.
Good.
It's not just like this mysterious API anymore. It's like, okay, there's actual steps I can follow.
Exactly.
And speaking of steps, they don't just focus on the happy path.
Right. What if something goes wrong?
Yeah, like, what if I mess up the token? Or what if I don't have the right scopes?
They have a whole section dedicated to error handling.
Oh, nice.
Like, we talked about badge directory, but there are other errors too. Invalid tokens, missing scopes. They even give you tips on how to debug common problems.
So they're, like, really holding your hand through this whole process.
They are, which is great. And remember that auth.revoke we talked about?
Yeah, the kill switch.
The kill switch, exactly. They go into detail about how to use that as well. All the different use cases, code examples, everything.
So if I need to revoke a token, I'm not just, like, left in the dark.
Nope, they got you covered.
Awesome.
So we've covered a lot. We've gone from understanding OAuth to actually seeing it in action, how to make API calls, handle errors, all that good stuff.
Yeah, like, I feel like I could actually write some code now.
You should. That's the goal.
But I'm sensing there's even more to this API than we've talked about so far.
Oh, there's always more. In the next part, we're going to go beyond these basic examples and look at some more specific use cases, get even more practical.
All right, so we've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of OAuth in Slack apps.
Yeah, we have.
We've demystified the whole authorization dance.
The secret handshake.
Yeah, exactly. And we've even seen some code examples for, like, actually using those access tokens to talk to the Slack API.
Real world stuff.
Yeah, but I'm hungry for more.
Of course.
Like, let's get even more practical. Let's say I'm building an app that needs to show the user a list of all the channels they're in.
Okay. Yeah.
How would I even, like, begin to approach that using the API?
That's a great example. So to do that, you'd want to use the conversations.list API method. And of course, you'd need the right scope for that, channels.read in this case.
Right. Got to get permission first.
Always.
So I go through the oath flow, get my token, and then I call conversations.list.
Yeah.
But, like, what does that call actually look like? Is that in the documentation?
It is. They break it down step by step, show you all the parameters you can use, what the response should look like. It's all there.
So I'm guessing it's like you build a JSON payload with your token and, like, any filters or whatever, and then you send it off to the conversations.list endpoint?
Pretty much. And they actually explain how you can filter the channels you get back. Like you can get just public channels or private channels or even archived channels. There's a lot of flexibility there.
Oh, that's cool. So, like, my app could have a feature where users can filter the list themselves.
Exactly. You can build some really powerful stuff with this.
This is awesome. Okay, now let's switch gears a little. What if my app needs to react to things happening in Slack, like a new message being posted or a user joining a channel, like real-time stuff?
That's where the Events API comes in.
Oh, okay.
And yes, the documentation covers that too.
So instead of, like, constantly checking for new stuff, my app can just get notified when something interesting happens.
Exactly. You subscribe to specific events, and Slack will ping your app when they occur.
That's way more efficient.
It is. It's like a push notification system for your app.
Okay, and where does OAuth fit into all of this?
You still need to get that initial access token through OAuth. But instead of using it for direct API calls, you use it to authorize your app to receive those event notifications.
So it's like I'm giving my app permission not just to read data, but to, like, listen in on what's happening.
Exactly. And they walk you through the whole setup process, how to create the request URL, how to handle the verification challenge from Slack, all that fun stuff.
Man, this opens up a whole world of possibilities, like real-time notifications, automated workflows, maybe even bots that can respond to users in real time.
The sky's the limit. And they even provide code examples for all of this, using different programming languages and frameworks.
This is really incredible. It's like we've gone from understanding the basics of OAuth to, like, unlocking the full potential of the Slack API.
And the best part is it's all documented so well. They don't just tell you what to do, they explain why it's important and how to do it securely.
Yeah, this documentation has been, like, our trusty guide through this whole journey.
It has. So, to wrap things up,
Yeah.
if you're building a Slack app, big or small, simple or complex, this documentation is your friend.
For sure. All right, folks, that's our deep dive into OAuth and Slack apps.
We went deep.
We did. Hopefully you've learned a ton about how it all works, how to use it securely, and most importantly, how to build awesome integrations with Slack.
And don't forget, the learning doesn't stop here. The Slack platform is constantly evolving, so stay curious, keep exploring.
And keep diving deep. Until next time, happy coding.